Today we continue in the sermon series, The Keys to Supercharging Your Life, based on the first 4 chapters of the book of Nehemiah. So if you'd like to grab your Bible, find chapter 2 of the book of Nehemiah, and that would be great. As you do that, I want to relate to you a story. When my girls were, I have 2 daughters, when my girls were young, there were a number of times where I would find myself in a very solid sleep at night. But somehow, and I don't know how the mind-body works this, but somehow you have this sense that somebody's in the room. And I'd be laying there on the side of the bed, and I'd wake up, and one of my little girls would be just a few inches from my face, staring back at me. And once my heart rate returned to normal, I got to ask them why they're there. And after this had happened a number of times, there wasn't even any need to ask them any longer. I just open up the blanket and they would hop in. Because there was something about, when you're scared, being in the bed with mom and dad. It's a wonderful place to be. It's a safe place to be when you're afraid, when you've got some kind of a fear that's hanging on. Go to mom and dad and get in bed with them. Well, you know what? That night, if I was the one to tuck them in that evening, I did not go to my daughter as I'm tucking her into bed, and I said, you know, honey, do you know about the boogeyman? Let me tell you a little bit about the boogeyman. He's this big, hairy beast, and he's got these really sharp, long teeth with even longer, sharper claws. You know, and he's got these beady, evil-looking eyes. And he says, oh my goodness, he's got this evil, low, mean growl that would even put the fear in a mountain lion. And you know what? He loves to eat children. Just loves to eat children. Oh, and by the way, I happened to notice maybe earlier before you came in the room, I think I saw him climb under your bed. Yeah. But don't worry. You know, the boogeyman, he only comes out in darkness. And so if you survive the night, don't worry. Don't worry. When the dawn comes, when the light comes, you'll be just fine after that. So, good night. Let me turn the light off and close the door. I'd never say that to my daughter. I never say that to her. Right? You know, it's an interesting thing about fear. You don't have to teach a child fear. It just seems to come naturally. You don't have to tell them terrible stories. There's just something about thunder and lightning or whatever it might be that brings this fear into the hearts of these little children. Fear is one of those things you just don't have to explain. They figure it out for themselves. They don't need any help. But unlike our childhood fears that come and go with the darkness, when we get older, it just seems that the dawn of the morning sun doesn't always chase the fear away. It hangs around. It stays with us. Fear is an emotion that's part of what it means to be human. Like a lot of things given to us by God, it can be a bad thing or a good thing depending upon what we do with it. In that sense, you know, it is God-given, and initially it's a good thing. If you fear fire, that's a good thing. If you have a little bit of healthy fear when you get behind a steering wheel, that's a good thing. I never want to go to the beach where there's a lifeguard there that has no reason to fear anything. I want a lifeguard that is alert because the lifeguard knows there are things to be afraid of. I never want to get on a roller coaster that's been designed by engineers who have no fear of physics and gravity. I want them to be afraid and them to worry about what it takes to control it properly so that many, many thousands of people can ride on this thing safely. Fear can be a very healthy kind of thing, a good thing. But many of us here know what it's like to stay up late at night, lose focus during the day, while we fear maybe that some tragedy might befall us, or we fear that something is going to happen to someone that we care deeply about, or that there might be bad news coming, and we are afraid of what that might mean for us. And something bad in our life seems to be taking over sometimes, and we're not sure how to deal with it, but we fear it. What do we do when the fear that we have turns to bad fear? Now, I'm not talking about the fear that causes you to curl up in the fetal position and to get in some corner dark room and tremble in great terror. I'm talking about the fear that you and I live with every day. You and I have learned how to cope with. In fact, you and I have learned how to hide so very well from the people around us. Our family, our friends, our loved ones often don't even know the fears that we carry because we have chosen not to share it with them. And we've learned, as adults, we've learned how to hide it, how to live with it, survive, but not to cure it, not to get rid of it. We simply dwell in it, that fear. What do we do when we have a fear of a little thing or a big thing, something that already has happened or something that may never happen, but yet we think it might? What do we do with that? How do we get past that? That's the challenge for today. That's the thought I want to leave you with today. And I think Nehemiah has something to say about that, because Nehemiah himself experienced a life-threatening fear. But before we get to chapter 2 of Nehemiah, I want to just set it up just very briefly. Remind you of chapter 1. And Nehemiah is the cupbearer to the king of Persia. And Nehemiah's brother visited him. And the brother informed him that the town of Jerusalem was still in ruins. That after 140 years of being in ruins, that while the temple got rebuilt, the rest of the town, and especially the wall that's supposed to surround it, remains nothing but rubble. And for Nehemiah, although he had never been to Jerusalem, although he was born and raised and grew up in that area of Persia, and he now worked in the palace, although he's never been there, obviously he was raised in the faith, and he was told what the town, the city, the village of Jerusalem meant to the people, to the Israelite nation. That town reflected and represented the health and wealth and well-being of the entire nation. When it looked bad, it placed shame upon the entire group of Israelites. That was said to be the town chosen by God himself. That was the town where the temple, not any temple, but the temple resided. It wasn't just another city. It was the city as far as the Israelite nation was concerned. And to know that it was still in rubble was an embarrassment to all the people. And after 140 years, Nehemiah couldn't believe that it was still in that kind of a state. And he was shocked to hear the news. We're told that he wept. In fact, and then he prayed. In fact, 2/3 of the first chapter is his prayer. Because he knows. He feels it has been placed on his heart now that he needs to go do something about this. But he knows one thing. The only way to get to Jerusalem is with the king's approval. And this king is not just any king. This king is known to be a very bad king. A mean and cruel king. And this is the person to whom he is the cupbearer. So with that, let's read chapter 2. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." I was very much afraid. But I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, Let him send me to the city in Judah, where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it." Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, "How long will your journey take? And when will you get back?" It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, "If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah? And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy." And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my request. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. When Sanballat and Horonite and Tobiah, the Ammonite official, heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. We'll stop right there. This is the word of the Lord for the people of the Lord. You know, it's been said that no command in the Bible can be found more often than commands related to fear. Do not be afraid. Do not fear. Fear only the Lord. It is mentioned so often because fear can be a very powerful force in our life. A very powerful force. Fear can make us do things we might not normally do. And to the other extreme, not do things that we should be doing. It could paralyze us at times. I don't know about you, but the first car I had one of those fairly cheap radios in it. Now, the radio technology, if you will, has gotten much better these days, and you don't have this situation as much. But I know that when I drove around that car, every once in a while, even though I didn't change the station, even though I didn't touch the radio, I would find myself all of a sudden listening to a completely different radio station. The reason is because as you would drive near a radio antenna, and some of these antennas are absolutely enormous, 100 feet or more tall, they are actually sending out great, powerful waves of radio signals. And if you are close enough, and if your radio isn't of good enough quality, that being so close to that power will absolutely overwhelm the electronics that's trying to rid itself of that frequency. It will overwhelm it, and it actually will take over your radio. Because the circuitry inside cannot handle that immense amount of power. It was not meant to take that. Now, unfortunately, our technology has gotten so that happens very infrequently. But that's the kind of thing that can happen with fear. Fear can take over your life in a way that suddenly it becomes the center focus. It becomes something that overpowers other things that maybe you should be spending your time on instead. And it becomes life-changing in some cases. It affects what you do, how you do it, or what you don't do. So, you know, a lot of us think that in order to face our fears, we have to have kind of the opposite of fear, and some of us think of the opposite of fear as being courage. We need to stand tall, stand up, face our fears, face the giants, and run into it. It's like this idea of courage is bravery. It's running into the battle, right? It's standing tall in front of it and showing courage, even though the overwhelming odds. And we think of that as courage. We see it in the movies all the time. But the fact of the matter is, courage for us doesn't usually come in these grandiose, spur-of-the-moment actions. Courage for us is more of how we handle the day-to-day things, right? Where we don't label it bravado. We don't normally think of it as courage. You know, in Nehemiah, as he is working through this, you know, I got to thinking about this. There are at least four different barriers that are he's facing as he has to face his fear. You see, you can't go before the king was sadness. The king lived in a palace where he did not want anybody surrounding him that was sad. He didn't want any bad news. He lived in a bubble. That was the norm for the kings of the day. Unless he asked for it, you were to be on your best. You were to look happy and glad, and to show yourself as sad could be life-threatening. All he had to do is snap his fingers and you're dead. Off with your head. Kings were known to do that. That was the norm of the day. But he knew that the only way to get from here to 1,000 miles away was to get the approval of the king. So he's got these things, these barriers. One of them is comfort. And I think these are true of us too. He's living in a palace. He's living in this place that is going to be the finest place in the land. This is, at the time, the capital of the empire, the Persian Empire. And he's living in the best place in the capital of the empire. You know, we often are afraid of losing our comfort. We're afraid that if we face the fear, if we deal with the fear, that in the process, it's just not going to be better. It could end up actually being worse. And I really, I'm not sure I want to let go of this. I'm comfortable here. And so we say, okay, I can live with this fear. I'll live with it. If it's not comfort, maybe it's fear of the unknown. You know, Nehemiah, he is talking about a city he's never been to. People he's never talked to. He doesn't really know all the details of what it looks like there, how bad it really is, what it's going to take. He has no idea if the people are going to help him in any way, shape, or form, but yet he feels called to go to Jerusalem to fix this. We often get this situation where we fear the unknown. We know what we're in now, and I can deal with what I'm in now. I've proven myself to survive unlike it, but I can deal with this fear now. But that over there, I have no idea what that is. It's like we have this saying, grass is greener on the other side. Well, with fear, it's telling you, not only is the grass not greener over there, but it's desert over there. This may not be great, but it's not desert. Over there, it's desert. And the fear of the unknown dwells on you, and it sucks the life out of you, and it tries to always give you the worst perspective. If it's not fear of losing comfort, fear of the unknown, then it's fear of conflict. None of us like to get in fights. None of us like to face conflict. We don't enjoy that. And sometimes when we have to face our fears, sometimes we know that the only way to get from here to there is to go through the valley of conflict. We have to deal with the issue. We have to face the person that we fear facing. And it's likely to be a situation of conflict. And so we choose to do nothing. If it's not comfort, if it's not the unknown, if it's not conflict, then maybe it's this idea of the fear of failure or not being capable. I don't know how to go over to Jerusalem and build that city. Nehemiah has no experience that we know of at building walls. He has no experience in governing peoples, which is what he's going to, if you read the rest of the story, he's going to end up becoming the governor. Right? He has no experience in that kind of leadership. He has no experience in mediating, which he's going to have to do between people. He has no experience in being an army general, which is he's going to have to do. There's all kinds of things. Being an administrator, dealing with a number of different issues, he's going to be faced. You know, if I was him, I'd be thinking, that's overwhelming. I'm not capable of that. Why would I think that I could do that? God, why are you calling me? You've got to have somebody. In all the people that you know, God, there's not somebody better qualified than me. We have this fear of failure. But courage is kind of an interesting thing when it comes to what you do in the day-to-day life, because courage, you know, we think of it as having, like I said earlier, this bravado, the strength, you know, that we can face the day. But the courage that Nehemiah had wasn't so much that. It's kind of opposite in a way. Because instead of having it all within himself and moving forward, he actually leans on something else. 3 something else's, actually. He he has these, and I won't call them crutches, they're supports, and they actually help him significantly, and he chooses intentionally to lean on them at this time. His courage comes from three things. First, you'll note that he prays. As I said earlier, 2/3 of the first chapter is a prayer. If you go through the rest of the book of Nehemiah, prayer is mentioned at least 11 times. And it's interesting to find out that as you read this, if you were to look at it closely, he has this thing called the quick prayer, or what I call the quick prayer. Some call it a telegraph prayer, an emergency prayer. But he does it in verse 4, the end of verse 4. And when the king says, "What is it you want?" Notice that the very next words were, "Then I prayed to God to heaven, and I answered the king." Then I prayed to God to heaven, and I answered the king. Right? You're going to find those quick prayers happen over and over and over and over again. You're going to find 2 of them in chapter 6. You're going to find 4 of them in chapter 13. And there's smatterings of others placed in. In fact, the book ends. The very last few words of the book of Nehemiah is a quick prayer. He does this over and over again. But understand that those quick prayers are based on 4 months of praying. From the first verse of chapter 1 to the first verse of chapter 2 is a period of 4 months that he's been praying. These quick prayers that he throws up to God very fast are based on and founded on months of other prayer. You know, I don't know about you, but I catch myself doing this where I'll lift up a quick prayer about something, and I hope that God will bless me in responding to it, but I haven't based it on a whole lot of anything else. It's like I expect God to be at my beck and call. Boom, boom, boom. As soon as I need it, God, He'll give it to me. I haven't been expressing my care and concern for that issue prior to that, and I should have been. Nehemiah does. He shows he calls on God. Please, soften the heart of this king. When I do approach you, when that time happens, please allow the king to honor me and allow me to go and do what is right. In order for him to leave the palace, he's got to have the king's approval. Now understand, this isn't just any man. Think about it. He's the cupbearer. He is someone that the king trusts enough to trust his life with. How many people do you have in your life like that? I don't expect there's a whole lot. The kings were assassinated left and right. I don't know how many dozens of times it happens just in this book alone. And these are only a few kings and the kings that have existed in this history of this world. Kings are assassinated quite often. So having a trusted cupbearer is a very important thing and not easily replaced. So for God to grant this would be a huge thing. For the king to grant this would be a huge thing as well. So he prays for 4 months as well as multiple quick prayers as he's going through this process. So the first thing is prayer. The second thing is planning. Not only had Nehemiah planned for the opportunity, but he had also prayed for the opportunity, but he also had planned for it and had an answer ready. I mean, think about this. After 4 months, he let his sadness show and didn't even realize it at the time. It slipped out one day. Had he not been prepared, had he not planned, what would he have said to the king? How would he have responded? This is his chance. This is his opportunity. The king noticed. This is the one, maybe the only time that he's going to have. I don't know about you, but I've been in a number of situations in my life, and they're very uncomfortable to go into a situation where maybe it happens so quick you don't have a chance to plan, or maybe you were foolish like I have been, where I simply didn't plan, and you go into a situation and you realize you are wholly inadequate for what's about to happen. And there is great fear. I can very much remember, many years ago, I was traveling around, and I was with a telecommunication company, and we were selling some technology, and there was one time where we went to a company out of town, and I was traveling with a salesperson, and as we normally did, we split it up. The salesperson usually handled the executives, and I usually handled the technical people. So the salesperson would be talking to them and trying to sell the concept, the idea, the technology, whatever, to the executives. And I'd be trying to do the same thing with the engineers. They'd ask me all these technical questions, and I'd try to explain them. I had done it many times. I had a whole presentation available to me. I had all kinds of things that I knew about the technology, and I felt very comfortable sitting down with these technical people and having those conversations. One day, thinking that that's exactly what I was going to do, I walked into a conference room and immediately realized that's not what I was being asked to do, because everybody in the conference room had a tie on. Most of the engineers I dealt with didn't. And I knew immediately these were the executives of the corporation, and I was being asked to give a presentation on the technology. Well, you know, what I was prepared to do was to talk at a very low, nitty-gritty level. That's not what they wanted to hear. They couldn't care less. That's what they assumed the engineers would want to know. They wanted a higher level. They wanted it from me instead of the salesperson. I'm telling you, my stomach was in my mouth. I was not prepared for that. I had not planned for that. I can tell you after that, I never got in a situation like that again where I wasn't ready. I was ready to talk to either from that moment on. But in that meeting, fortunately, I didn't stick my foot in my mouth. And I don't think to this day I said anything that was incorrect. But it was a pretty scary situation for me. There was a lot of financials running on the line for this. You know, Nehemiah had obviously planned. I mean, think about what he said to the king. He said to the king, he said, you know, he didn't say, you know what, there's this God that I really love, and I would like to go to the place called Jerusalem, because there's this temple there, and that's where we think God resides, and we built this wonderful temple there, and the city really important to us in our faith and to the Jewish people that like me, and I would really like to be able to do that. Is that okay? Could I go rebuild the wall and fix that city back up? He didn't say any of that to the king. What he said was, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah, Judah's the region, where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. He doesn't mention God at all. Why? Because he knew the one thing that all of the cultures of the day revered, and that was the ancestors, right? They all honored ancestors. This was something that was very common in many different religions, and certainly of the Middle East region of the day. He knew. Now think about this. If you've been praying for 4 months, if you've been planning for 4 months, what are you doing? You're going to be listening to every single person that comes to the king. And you're going to be listening. How are they presenting their request? Did it get approved? Did it not get approved? And you're listening. And you're trying to figure out, what is it that tips the scale? What's the one thing that I can say to the king that he seems to approve of? I'm planning all the time. I'm planning. I'm thinking, right? I'm not just praying. I'm not just paralyzed and saying, okay, God, it's all about you. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit here and make you do everything. I'm planning. I'm preparing myself. And in the planning, it's kind of interesting about planning. Planning is also something that affects your psyche, right? You begin to get a little bit more comfortable about this fear, this thing that you're going to face. In his case, the fear of death. You get a little bit more because you're thinking about it more and more and more. And although it may not completely relieve or release the fear completely, it allows you to get a little bit more ease at it because you go through the planning process. If you were to do an intervention, there are these shows now these days on intervention, and maybe you've been involved with one or know someone that has, where a family or friends, they intervene in someone's life because that life is becoming tragic, it's becoming difficult, it's becoming disastrous in some way, an addiction or bad habits or whatever it might be. And the family and friends get together so that they can intervene and try to redirect. It's a sudden moment where they try to pull them completely off of that path and onto something else. You don't go into an intervention without planning. You think about what's going to be said. You think about how they're going to receive what's going to be said. You think about who's going to be present and who should be, who has influence in a positive way in this person's life. You think about once I ask them to do something different, what's the different that I'm going to ask them to do? Just stop? Yeah, would you just stop and let us know how that works for you? No, you think about what's the clinic they can go to? What's the program they can get involved with? What's the other people that maybe have gone through something like this that can be of a support? What's a support group that they can attend? Right? You're thinking ahead. You're preparing and planning for that conversation so that when it actually happens, you're ready. Lack of preparation makes fear bigger. Think about it. Lack of preparation makes fear even bigger than it already is. When you prepare, when you feel that you have prepared to the best of your ability, there is something about a peace and a calmness that God can give to you in that moment. To be ready for facing whatever that fear might be. So he prayed and he planned and he had patience. You see, patience is not paralysis. And we have a tendency, if we're patient long enough, it becomes paralysis. Patience and paralysis are very different. Patience is, I'm waiting to do this, and I am going to do this. I am planning to do this. I am praying to do this. I am going to. I am just waiting on the Lord to direct me. It's not using that as an excuse so that I don't have to do it, so that I can continue to put it off one more day, and one more day, and one more day. It's saying, I'm doing the work that I need to do, and I trust God to do what I know only God can do. And in this case, it softened the heart of the king toward my request. But I'm going to be ready. I'm going to know what I have to do and what I have to say, but I can't do what God's going to do. And I'm foolish to think that I can, but I'm going to be ready when it happens. Pray, plan, and be patient. He waited for 4 months. Now, these things aren't 1, 2, 3. You don't just do one, then the other, and the other. These things are all happening at the same time. They're intertwined, intermingled together. He's always praying. He's always planning, and he's being patient for 4 months. And then when the time comes, sometimes it even catches you by surprise. It did him. You act. You're ready. Fear's still there. The possibility that he's going to be dead a few moments from then, still there. You don't know how the king is going to act. And this king has acted pretty harshly in some cases. But you know what? If you ever want to have a supercharged life, if you have to get past letting fear drive you constantly. Letting fear be the mechanism through which you live your life, the lens that you see things. It might be something small, it might be something enormous, but fear wants to rule. It wants to be the king of your throne. And when that happens, God's not there anymore. He's been displaced, pushed down, set aside, moved over. God wants one fear. One fear. Us to fear him. Yes, that means a little bit of fear when it comes to his wrath, his power, all that kind of thing. But ultimately, it really means to honor him, to revere God. That's the fear that he wants. And only that. Amongst the other healthy little fears that I had mentioned at the very beginning of the message. But he does not want us to have such fear that it paralyzes us or that it causes us to do things that we wouldn't normally do. Things that would be harmful for us, either in action or in inaction. A supercharged life is one that's full and rich and purposeful and energizing and positive, and one where you fear only the Lord. An average charged life, if you will, has weakness that keeps showing up in the form of fear. It's draining. It falls short often. It's one where fear reigns at times. So for you, as you sit here this day, is there a fear, whether it be little, whether it be enormous, whether it be an elephant in front of you or something much smaller? Do you have a fear in your life right now? Something that maybe has taken a hold of you and taken residence up on the throne? Maybe it's just sitting on the arm of the throne right now. But it wants everything. It wants it all. And it will do everything it can to do just that. Learn from Nehemiah. Lean on prayer. Lean on preparation. Lean on patience. Lean on them as your means for finding courage. They may seem strange places to look for courage, but they are great places to find it. God will show up. Ultimately, it means trust. Trust in our Lord, that He will be there. I'll close the message with this. John 14, verses 26 and 27 say this. But the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you. Peace I leave with you. Peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid.